And Brian Mohr, CEO of Anthem. Take it away.
Thanks, Kate. Really appreciate it. Francesca, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I need to do the proper intro for all of our guests. So to make sure I don't screw it up, I am going to read, and it's a brief one. And I also have some fun facts. I had a chance to chat with Francesca. Was that last week or whenever it was? God, the days just run together. But, given that the virtual environment has potential to lack some level of intimacy, I got a little bit of extra info from Francesca, not only about what she does in her journey, but a little bit about who she is as well. So I'm going to share a couple of those nuggets. So let me start with the professional intro here first. Francesca is the co-founder and CEO of Home, a community experience platform that is designed for commercial and residential landlords. Formerly, she brought Europe's largest startup network, techmeetups.com, to 5 cities in North America and ran a 14,000 square foot performing arts space in New York City. She was offered a position on Feed the Children's board of problem solvers at the tender age of 12, starred in Oscar winner Julianne Moore's Broadway show Freckleface, and represented Canada in an array of mathematics competitions, which garnered her a full ride to university for finite mathematics. Recognized for her work as a founder and thought leader, she was nominated for Top Founder at MIPIM and is 2 years running listed as CRE Tech's top female influencers. I had asked her on the personal side, what was the very first band she ever saw in concert, to which she replied, the band Oasis, in the middle of a massive thunderstorm at an outdoor arena, which I'm sure there's a great story there. I asked her favorite food. She said it was her husband's pancakes. They have them every Saturday morning. It's a family ritual. And a couple other little nuggets. I asked her, what's one thing that most people assume about her that is absolutely dead wrong? And as you can probably tell from her youthful spirit, her response was, because she looks young, she often gets confused for the kid's babysitter as opposed to the kid's mom. And being from Canada, particularly Toronto, I don't know if this is a Canadian thing. So Francesca, you maybe have to add a little bit of color to this one, but I asked her her favorite word and her response was sorry. So, an overly apologetic individual. Francesca, so awesome to have you here. Welcome to PHX Startup Week. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. That is the most colorful introduction I think I've ever gotten for a professional event.
Well, listen, at the end of the day, professional as we might pretend to be, at the end of the day, we're all just human beings trying to make it in this world. So
absolutely. I love it.
Yeah, it's great to spend time with you. Great to see you again. I think for the benefit of our audience, it would be awesome if you could share a little bit of your journey. And in particular, maybe, at what point did this whole passion around mathematics and finite mathematics enter the equation? And then how does that lead you? How do you go from finite mathematics to Broadway to then running a proptech company? Like, this is a really interesting sort of like patchwork quilt of your life. So give us the high level if you can.
Yeah. So I've always been a really curious individual. What's funny, and this is well documented, is I always wanted to be Guinness Book of World, like from a kid, Guinness Book of World record holder for person with the most jobs. That's when people would be like, what do you want to be when you're older? That would be my answer at like 7. So I get super curious about problems, and there's so many through lines within theater and running a theater and events, and it's all an algorithm. I mean, I feel like there's a really common through line in all of those. And also inside of all of those careers, I was doing multiple things. So I went to theater school, but I was also making all the actors in my school's websites, so I never really color within the lines. it's the formal answer.
I love it. I love it. So why don't you share a little bit about, you came to New York City, if my memory serves, when you were 16, yes?
I just
Sure.
turned 18.
Yeah. Share a little bit about your arrival there and the journey from there.
Yeah, so I'm from Toronto, and that is a very Canadian thing to apologize. Every sentence starts with sorry. Um, and, and that is not New York City. When I first arrived, I was really surprised. I remember lining up, I was walking with a teacher. I came to New York City for academy, for theater. I was planning on going to take my full ride at university. I did like a year of deferment and I just like never went back. I just jumped straight into career after that. But I remember walking with a teacher the first day and being really shocked at how New York works as a Canadian, as a very sheltered Canadian. One really key moment was I lined up to cross the street. There was like, I was lining up behind the person who I thought had gotten to the crosswalk before me. And I remember that my teacher looked over at me and she's like, "What are you doing? You walk to the front." It just doesn't matter when you got there. You just walk to the front. And you just cross the street, whether it's a car or not, whether it's your turn or not. And so like little things like that all the way through. But as far as starting career, oh, you're muted. I missed your throw in.
Yeah, Kate gave me really specific instructions to make sure that I mute in between conversations, and I'm not used to muting. So my horribly now timed comment was, "We're not polite in New York City. What are you doing?"
I know, right? What are you doing? But I went to theater school. I call it my empathy training. It actually really helped me understand user experience, customer journey. I briefly was an actor, but they say that, all the way through, they say, if you can imagine yourself being happy doing absolutely anything else, do that, because this is just so impossibly hard. You're never financially rewarded. You cannot build a stable life out of this. So I did the Broadway thing for a while. I got really into how the theater that I was working in ran, which brought me to understanding how to navigate independent contractors and make them feel supported, as the shows within the theater were constantly switching out. Sometimes they sit down for a day, sometimes they sit down for half a year. And so it really set me up for my existing business. Navigating teams running around all over different cities and popping up services in a million different buildings.
And so is that where the idea of home came from, is all these interactions? And I know, about 6 years ago is when it started. You connected with your co-founder, Ryan. So maybe you can share a little bit of that, the inception story.
Absolutely. So we started home out of my co-founder, Ryan. There were three of us. There's my husband and my work husband is what I called them. So my husband was our head of programming. He was first to get involved in the business. He was a teacher trainer in the wellness space in New York City, really well known. And so he got adopted into, Ryan was starting a meditation tea shop. Tea and meditation side by side. And he was testing the concept inside a residential building, luxury residential building in Brooklyn. And I saw this as a massive opportunity to basically avoid the overhead of brick and mortar spaces, and jump on the bandwagon, the trend of boutique fitness studios, but then pop them up inside of buildings. And so we started working with amenity managers, and we understood how backward that concept, the concept of amenity managers, where buildings were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to not only retrofit and change the entire use of a space, and lose the square footage as far as revenue driving inside their properties, but then they were also paying for this constant upkeep, this flat maintenance fee. And then on top of it, they're paying for all of the services that were actually activating the spaces. And we quickly realized that there was a whole sub-market of properties that didn't have the budget for an amenity manager, but wanted to engage their tenants and could benefit from kind of a pop-up version of this amenity management model. I'm getting too into the weeds of
Not at all.
and why we love doing it, but it really took off. We had a really easy time fundraising. We got into a ton of the premier accelerators. We're kind of like industry darlings. But of course, all through those highs, typical entrepreneurial journey, there are these crazy lows of, like I spoke to you about last week, we had a founder leave, and we had, a pandemic recently. So it's been a roller coaster, the whole journey, the whole past 6 years.
As you think back, do you recall like what that first big break was where you and the team, you're like, oh, we're on to something. This is going to work. Was there that instant? Was there that client? Was there that group of properties or an amenity manager where you had that confirmation that really put that burst of wind in the sails?
This sounds terrible that this is the moment where I felt like we really had something. But we had been working with an amenity manager side by side, kind of feeding them programming, managing the marketing of it and the technology, because really they were just using paper surveys, paper sign-ins, putting paper notifications under people's doors. They weren't really utilizing technology to scale this because they were getting paid a couple $100,000 a month per property. So they were perfectly fine using paper. It wasn't a scale heavy business, right? But we were working with this amenity manager, and then we took on a bunch of contracts outside of them, maybe potentially taking some of that business from them. And they were our first partner. And they turned around and asked to buy us. They gave us a terrible offer. We were like a couple months old, incredibly green. And it was a lot more money than we had ever seen. But we knew that they were trying to kind of nip it in the bud.
Yep.
Super early. So we didn't keep taking business from them. And that was the moment we understood that we had something that was going to grow really quickly, and be really exciting, and would take us on this amazing entrepreneurial journey. We didn't know for how long, but at least for the past 6 years.
When you and the team rejected the offer, did they remain as a partner or a client?
Well, at that point, working with amenity managers was never going to be our path. They all have, like I said, it's not a scale heavy business. They make a lot of money per contract. So they don't, they wouldn't have given us enough scale or runway. So that wasn't the long-term path. So we remained friends with one of the founders, very close friends actually, but they're not a client anymore. And I think I remember the company that purchased them that actually gave us the offer. I remember him quite specifically saying he was going to crush us like a cockroach. I think that was the exact phrase, that we were nothing compared to them. And now it's 6 years later, so didn't do a really great job crushing us.
No, clearly a little bit more work that needs to be done. I was going to attempt to time a response to which you responded, sorry, but
yeah. Basically I left scared and apologetic. And
Right. I'm curious, given that the initial concept was this pop-up meditation combination tea yoga thing that you guys were working on, at what point did you dump the whole tea side of the equation and begin to migrate much more into what clearly has taken off?
Day one upon me joining.
You're just
I was not building a brick and mortar tea shop. But from my theater background, and I think people outside of theater don't have a clear idea of how crazy it is to stage manage a production. But just from understanding the stage management side of theater, creating something that feels fresh and organic and kind of new and spontaneous every single, multiple times a day, is really up to the stage manager, having props exactly where they need to be and making all the actors, as soon as they come off stage for 5 seconds, be able to change into a new character or have a moment's rest before they walk back on. But from understanding stage management, I was really interested in tackling the much more complicated problem. Fitness classes are really recurring, but the much more complicated challenge of making repeatable lifestyle events. popping up large scale lifestyle events that feel really interesting and unique and bespoke to each property and their demographic, but just doing it at scale using like recurring stage management techniques. And so that was super fun for me. So I came in day one and was like, this is not what we're doing. We're doing this thing now. We're basically a stage management technology now.
Well, and clearly one of the things that we had talked about that continues to emerge as you describe it is this notion of sort of abandoning the more traditional model of all this investment made into transforming these entire floors inside of buildings to be these common use spaces for activities and fitness and whatnot. And I'd have to assume that your stage management experience, you could go into almost any size space and probably begin to sort of think through, okay, how would we set up? What would we set up? What's the amount of equipment and things that we can bring in to create the actual environment to be inviting and welcoming for the residents or, the tenants that are there. And that, frankly, using lobbies and, hallways even.
And houses.
Yeah, like there's all this unused common space that, most people don't think about as an opportunity, and yet you did.
Yeah, and there's so many, I think what supported us technologically was obviously these tools for scaling. What was so nice having come from theater was there during tours, you're moving around, you're putting on the same show with the same props, the same backdrop in a million different spaces all over the country. So I saw that there was a way to kind of package or productize these events that feel really unique and understand what minor variables there might be. Oh, there might be, it might be a lobby, so it might be common space, and there might not be walls. We might need a partition, trying to figure out the minor variables, but really keep the core of each event pretty repeatable, regardless of where we're going. Regardless of how many people are attending, kind of the same vendors, and we're producing the same things for continuity. And then it makes what is a very challenging, really time consuming process for amenity managers. It makes it really scalable and fast for us. It's just basically throwing things on a conveyor belt for us.
Got it.
Yeah.
What about from this? I'm curious from the staffing perspective, the hiring perspective.
Yeah.
From those earliest days, finding some of those, whether it be a wellness professional, a fitness instructor, somebody that does meditation or yoga, and never having hired folks in that space. What's the general makeup in terms of their expectations, and were you able to meet them, or were they taking a bit of a leap of faith initially to buy into the vision in hopes that you could present something that was better than what the alternative might have been?
I said better than Equinox.
Was that like the big competitor?
Yeah, Equinox, Pure, all those big gyms, the really luxury ones. So I think I know what you do. This is your area, right? Culture was, being a mission first company was really what brought so many people on board. I talk a lot about how I work for my team. So many people take on entrepreneurship because they want to be their own boss. The reality is you gain a lot of bosses. You've got your investors, you've got the public, you've got your clients. But for me, my bosses really are my team. And that's a pretty large team when you include all of these service providers and vendors that are on our platform. And I obviously was a former actor. A lot of us on the HQ are former caterers or event hosts or actors, also dancers. We were all used to the gig economy before, and so we really feel like we built a gig economy worker centric culture. We're really focused on keeping our service providers are happy to provide the best possible service to the tenants, which makes the clients as happy as possible, which makes our investors happy because we keep growing. So we really think about the service providers first. We offer long-term opportunities so people can grow into getting benefits, which obviously in America is really, really challenging for gig workers, especially in fitness. We were seeing people that were teaching 20 classes, running around, jumping in cabs or driving all over to different locations, trying to cobble together a schedule that could feed them basically. And we wanted to not only provide stability for gig economy workers, but we also wanted to provide this sense of dignity almost. We wanted to make sure that this felt as important and as successful when you got a full-time job at home. We wanted to make sure it felt as successful as getting a full-time job in any other industry. So we do paid trainings. We are really serious about continuing education, paying for people to get recertified or certified in new services. And we take that really seriously. We pay a lot of attention to quality control. And we really try and create an environment that people want to continue kind of investing in our business, and not just what's really common in the gig economy is if this one's paying me 100 and this one's paying me 105, I'm going to do this one, the other one. So we want to make it, even if we're 100 and someone's offered you 105, we want to be, even at 100, we want to be your priority because it's setting you on a path to stability, or setting you on, we're the ones that pay for your health care, or you just enjoy being with us. So
yeah.
It's a big cultural engine, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we attract the best talent. We have really great referral rates. It's actually hard how many applications we get. It's really hard to give everybody an opportunity. We really do. We are overwhelmed a lot with applications. So that part of our business is moving very well.
Awesome. Well,
and it's all culture.
I'm going to switch gears for a minute because you said something, I don't know, 5-10 minutes or so ago that I have no doubt the audience probably picked up on. You made this distinction amongst you and your co-founders that one is your husband and one is your work husband. And, you know, as anyone would likely attest that's been through the entrepreneurial journey at any level, those co-founder relationships can be the make or break reality of the success of the business. And here you are 6 years in, or at least 6 years ago, beginning the journey with, someone who you are married to and someone who you are married to between 8 and 5, or whatever the hours of operation are.
8 and 10.
Talk about, how do you balance that? How are you, and particularly, doing it with your life husband as opposed to your work husband, and how you've been able to create boundaries, if indeed that's what you've done to create the level of success?
Yeah, I'm sure anybody who has a co-founder relationship understands that they quickly become more important to you than your spouse. So that's maybe helpful for my relationship with my husband, that there's a little bit of weight off. He doesn't have to be everybody to me, I guess. But one thing that my husband and I developed slowly over, I'm assuming the first couple of years, I guess I kind of blacked out the very first couple of years of entrepreneurship. It was so wild. But
it was all that tea you were drinking.
All that tea. Yeah. It was all the yoga.
Bad tea.
What my husband and I developed was we're really in strong boundaries. We played this game almost, and we continue to pretty much play this game when we're at home personally. We talk about our jobs and our work life as if we don't work at the same place. And sometimes as if I'm not his boss, depending on what part of his job he's referencing. And we really try and stay husband and wife at home, and co-founders at the office. And it's really worked for us. It was actually during the pandemic, I had to furlough Corey, and I probably shouldn't say it that way, but he's in recruiting, and we weren't recruiting during the pandemic. It was really adjusting the company, churning out virtual content. And so we also needed somebody at home. We have a 2 and a 5-year-old to look after our children. And so it was either him or me, and one of us was going to be furloughed. And we had that conversation together, and he took that on for a couple months until they got back to school. But during that time, it was we kind of recognized how long we'd been playing this game of pretending we don't work at the same place when we talk about our jobs when we come home. Because if anybody's been away from the office for a leave of absence or paternity or maternity leave, or maybe you were out on furlough also during the pandemic, you almost don't want to hear anything because you want to, if you're going to hear like a tidbit, it's going to make you want to ask a bunch of questions and like get involved and like email somebody. If you're hearing something's not going the way that you set it up to be, to set it up to go, or how it normally goes when you're there. So that was the first time I realized I really couldn't play this game with Corey anymore, because if he heard anything that I was sharing about my work life, he'd want to kind of leave his furlough. And so that was a really challenging couple months there. But that's the it's also really interesting. I think it also creates this real family vibe in the company because I'm literally married to another co-founder. So everybody kind of feels like part of the larger Loftus family.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you talked about the pandemic. Obviously, none of us have been immune from what has happened over the past year plus.
Yeah.
You've also talked about the relationship with your investors, and given at least what I've conjured up in my mind of providing these services that Home does to these residential and commercial landlords and amenities managers, and frankly, the people who live there to gather together in public places to
Yep.
take advantage of the variety of services that Home offers. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that over the past year that might have been stressed out a little bit. And
Yeah.
so, walk us through as best you can what happened, and in particular, that relationship with your investors. How did they respond?
I was really lucky to have angel investors who were invested in a ton of other businesses also. And pretty early on in the pandemic, because I feel like everybody in our last fundraising round was asking a lot of questions about recession and are you a recession-proof business? And we had talked a lot about how I would, if I were to project into the future, how a recession would work for Home. So we talked about being kind of a lower price option compared to amenity managers. So while we would churn a lot of clients, we'd probably get a lot of clients from people who couldn't afford amenity managers anymore. And it kind of played out a little bit like that. Of course, we didn't expect to not be able to do in-person services when we had this conversation, but I'm really lucky I had really malleable investors. I was sending updates pretty much every week. Which was in the midst of like being very involved in the delivery and the changeover of our processes and our technology and all of our marketing materials, and just, the list goes on. I was heavily involved. In the midst of being involved in that, it's really hard to pull yourself out to give everybody kind of a heads up on what's going on or kind of give them insight. But I felt like that really kept my investors really calm. And a couple months into the pandemic, the phrase I kept hearing from them was, "Don't worry about it. Flat is the new up. Flat is the new up. If you survive this, it's a huge win. Don't worry about growth," because to worry about doubling our top line revenue, it was impossible in the midst of such huge change for the business. And they gave me a lot of space to just do whatever was necessary to keep as many clients as possible, stay really involved in those relationships, and kind of sow seeds for more growth post-pandemic. During it, we tripled our number of clients, but at a much lower per contract rate, obviously, for virtual. So we definitely were a little below flat. But and I think the hardest thing in the entire pandemic was managing people when everybody felt incredibly spread thin, and having to, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, work weekends, work overnight, to deliver a brand new product. We delivered a brand new version of what we do, a fully virtual version of what we do in 10 days from when we closed our first location. And that was 100% the team just working. I don't think anybody slept in those 10 days. I just think everybody put every ounce in. And it's hard to navigate how long they're going to have to work hard like that, right? They put in those 10 days and it feels like it should be like, great, now I go on a vacation.
Right.
And we had no idea how long the pandemic was going to draw on. So navigating mental health issues during that time, making sure people did take vacations, understanding that sometimes those HR conversations just became therapy sessions for people in their personal lives, things that were going on. People were moving, friends were dying. You know, it was insane. And I think the hardest part of the pandemic, I had a lot of grace from my investors. So with that grace, the hardest part of the pandemic really became people for us.
Yeah.
That was a very long answer to your question.
No,
It's been a very long pandemic.
It has been a very long pandemic, no doubt, and I think an important insight as to what you and the team and your investors went through and the level of support that you had. And I'm curious too. You and I chatted about this briefly, but I think it's a phenomenal perspective. We talked about this sort of unicorn or bust philosophy that seems to cast both a very special light around a few companies that can achieve that kind of breakthrough status. But in reality, right, they're called unicorns for a reason. And, this whole session that you're doing today sort of revolves around this knowingness of why do people get into entrepreneurship, right? Is it knowledge acquisition? Is it status? Is it freedom? With that status, maybe part of that is this ability to achieve some level of financial success or some breakout level of financial success. But, I think it's interesting, the conversation you and I shared around your philosophy of this unicorn expectation. Share with the audience, some of what we talked about.
Yeah. So it kind of hit me later on in my entrepreneurial journey. I'm definitely led by curiosity, but there's always this level of status gain. Everybody's always driven by some sort of reached for status. And I think what's really common is when you start a company and you want to increase your status, typically the trough or like the fall into failure is much more scary and much more, much further down than someone who's driven purely by mission or driven by their desire to be free from having a boss or a sort of thirst for knowledge. So I learned probably too late in my entrepreneurial journey that I was deeply unhappy because I was so scared of failing. And in my mind, failing was defined as the business closing. And I realized there were so many layers to failure. There's so many ways to define success, kind of, the opposition of failure. I realized for me, there's a million layers and I can talk through them a little bit, but there was, do I want this company to be bequeathed to my child on my deathbed? Is that, if you're so worried about losing the company or the company running out of cash or not being able to get an investment or, a disruptor coming in and making my industry not valuable anymore, not moving fast enough, whatever was plaguing me at the time, whatever fear or anxiety, if I'm so scared of the business closing down, let me go to the opposite scenario and really ask myself, do I want to bequeath this business to my child on my deathbed? And once I decided that's not success for me, I could kind of move away from that. Do I want to start a unicorn? Not really me. And also, if you want to start a unicorn, I probably would need to fail quickly a couple times in order to find the right idea. Do I want to just move myself up to being considered for executive positions inside this industry? Because if so, I'm probably already there. By my couple years of running my company, I'm probably good. I could jump out of this business, close it down, and move into an executive company in this industry. I've already achieved that goal. But I realized really for me, it was mission oriented. I wanted to inspire other companies to start doing exactly what I'm doing. I wanted competitors. At this time, when I was asking myself these questions, I didn't really have that. I wanted to inspire my employees with the culture of the company. I wanted them to go other places and start their own companies that have a similar culture. I just kind of wanted to change our field. And I felt like I would generally know when that time had come. And then I could sell the business or move on really comfortably. And kind of every day that I was working towards that, I could be happier and I could be completely disconnected from the anxiety of the company closing, as long as I knew I was working towards a very specific goal that defined success for me.
Yeah, that must have been an incredibly liberating feeling to be able to kind of find that footing.
Yeah, as soon as I said though to my head of people, I kind of don't want to bequeath this business to my children. She was like, are we closing down? Do I have no job? And I thought, oh, I should probably keep this to myself a little bit more inside the company. This is liberating for me, but maybe I shouldn't share this widely in the company. So I would like to bequeath. I would like to retire here. No.
Knowing that a lot of your business exists in some of the largest cities here in the United States, and clearly I would make the assumption, and maybe clearly is the wrong word to use, you're a much better judge of that. Now, as things begin to open up again, like what are you seeing? It would seem to me that you're a really good sort of tip of the spear as an indicator of how the general, public is feeling about getting together again. What are you seeing and hearing from your team, from your clients? What's happening?
So we started back in person. We have a big chunk of buildings opening up May 9. And we've seen more willingness to open in our kind of secondary markets. Our newest market is Phoenix, hence being here. And we've seen far more willingness to open there in Phoenix than some of our more larger markets like in San Francisco or in New York City. And I've seen how hard hit at least our office division has been. So we serve multifamily apartment buildings. We also serve offices. And we believe that our offices are probably 8 to 12 months behind our multifamily properties as far as coming back to the same scale that they were at as far as their contracts before. It's been pretty smooth moving back into multifamily. I think every landlord expected that they would just not get paid anymore. They would have no tenants. I think people were really scared at the beginning. And it's been a lot smoother for them than they expected. And I think everybody's pretty relieved in the multifamily space. Office has been pretty challenging. And it's so funny. There are two there are two very different points of view in office that I've come across. One is, they're so worried about liability. They want to touch absolutely nothing. They don't even want to acknowledge that anything has happened over the past 2 years. They don't want to say coronavirus. Nothing has happened. Nothing has changed. There is no hand sanitizer anywhere in the building. We will not acknowledge it. And so nobody can sue us. And then there is the really proactive folks who are trying to encourage people back to the office. So they're actively using dollars on services like ours to demonstrate how much they've done inside the property to make people feel really comfortable coming back. And they use our services to entice people back to the office on key days to make them feel like, after they've come in for that one day, they've kind of ripped the Band-Aid off. They've gone through their commute. They've seen all the services in the building. They've downloaded, whatever technology they need to certify that they're well as they're going in. They've worn their PPE or whatever they have to get into the building. They've done the temperature checks and they get in and think, actually, that wasn't that bad. I actually feel really safe. I'm happy to not have my child screaming in the other room. It's really nice to come back to my office. And so there's really two camps in office. And in multifamily, it's been pretty smooth.
That's awesome. I want to do a quick time check with Kate because Kate knows me quite well and I can get carried away without much prompting. So how are we doing on time? Do we have questions from the group? I can keep going. You tell me, Kate.
Got one question and we have 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, then
Okay.
let's go to the question, and then depending on the answer, we can fill in some additional space. No problem.
If you have any questions, now's the time to go into Whova and populate it in there. So I'll start with this one. You mentioned that you're focused on maintaining the dignity within the community. I was wondering how you balance the demands and expectations of all your stakeholders, investors, tenants, providers, you and your employees.
I don't balance it very well. I am an employee. That's all I focus on is the happiness of my vendors and my employees. And my investors kind of had to get on board with that day one. I've got some weird requests for myself also personally. Like I never like to make more than 2x what the bottom employee in the company is making. And that is totally a personal choice. And we'll have investors come in and think that I'm not incentivized enough to grow the company. My incentive really comes from the team moving together. And I add a ton of things that are really culture focused that, don't necessarily link to the bottom line very clearly. But we did something really scary a couple of months ago, and we asked people how much money they would make. How large and what somebody would have to offer them to leave the company. And it's kind of a scary question as an owner because you don't really want people to start thinking about what is my number to leave, because then they're imagining leaving, and you don't want that turnover, right? And we found out that basically people would need a 3x offer to leave the company, and that was how we kind of quantified the success of the culture. And so it helps to get kind of investors that are a little more numbers focused on board with everything that we do that's culture focused. And my strange requests that I make as a founder inside the business, because it really does. I made the statement just a second ago that it doesn't look like it obviously affects the bottom line, but it does affect the bottom line when you think about it that way. It means people are invested.
I have a question. How do you establish that type of a culture in a new market? So you're wanting to come to Phoenix. Yay. We'd love to have you. 5th largest city in the country. It's about time, Francesca. So you're going to come in with your mindset and your culture and your company. How do you launch?
It's a really great question. We have something called Homeschool. It's a pay, and we also make sure that all of our trainings for new employees are paid. We think of our homeschool as our second last step before hiring somebody. And before you're even hired, even before you have an agreement, we pay you to come in. It's kind of based on the Zappos model. I don't know if you've heard about this, where you get paid to not join the company. You must really want to not be here. We will pay you to not be here. And so we do something similar where we pay for our trainings, and that kind of establishes the right energy for people coming into the company. But we also pair people up with current employees, and they get to do their last interview with a current employee. So it's a reverse interview. So we really demonstrate that we want you to choose us as your employment, even though we know we're speaking typically to gig workers who normally are just kind of like self-onboarding to these platforms that provide the same services as us. We intentionally do something very different to distinguish ourselves. And then another big piece is we move somebody from HQ into that first role in the company, so they kind of bring it with them. But it's kind of weird in a virtual world, right? Some of our employees in other cities said they'd never felt so connected to the HQ team until pandemic, because they were with us every day now. Naturally, the different markets are going to take on their environment. A driving city versus a subway city, they have slightly different nuances to their culture. But it was really homogenous during the pandemic, because everybody was working from home, everybody was on the same Zoom, everybody was having the same meetings. So I think the pandemic really did actually help with culture.
Brian and I work in a very similar industry, and I personally have found more beautiful gifts that came out of the pandemic than, I mean, obviously there's a lot of sacrifice and there's a lot of scary things and unfortunate news as well. But like, generally speaking, I think we can all find a lot of unexpected gifts because of this time in our own corners. One more question before we wrap up. You give credit to culture eats strategy for breakfast. What defines your culture outside of you, the founder?
Oh, we're really rituals focused. So we have a handful of rituals that we use for every single meeting. We open meetings the exact same way every time. Every single meeting, inside or outside of the company, when we're doing phone calls with clients, we do a 7-second breath to kind of drop into the meeting. We close every meeting with kind of clearings, anything that's come up in the meeting, any work that you've taken on that feels stressful, anything in the meeting that you want to clear, we close with that. And then we start with the little clearings, then we do a little celebration after. We have Dharma meetings once a month, to kind of reconnect to why we're in the company, the mission of the company, monthly, with little great cultural activities. And then it really helps that we're all service providers at the same time. So there's a lot of yogis, a lot of talking about the moon cycles, those kinds of the actual gigs and the services we provide in the building. It's kind of baked in, that we're all kind of seeing the world the same way.
Okay, so one more. It's a really good question.
Yeah.
Okay. Your comment about mission focused as an antidote for fear of failure is brilliant.
Thanks.
To what extent do you, or can you, share your fears with the team to work through the fears? Sharing equals transparency, but may also be perceived as weakness for founders. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'm young. I constantly fear walking into a room and my ideas kind of being a wash to people, because they think I'm too idealistic, and they think it's related to how long I've been on the planet and not, my mission, and being really mission focused and driven. That's a constant fear of mine. And then everything I listed earlier, I was constantly worried that there would be a disruptor coming to our space, and it would make my industry invaluable. I was constantly worried that our industry wasn't going to be hot anymore, and so nobody would want to invest in our space. I'm also a woman, if you've noticed. I'm kind of constantly fearful that I'm not going to present the right way. That I'm going to laugh too much or smile too much and come across as not serious enough, because my voice is higher and I smile a lot and I wear dresses and my hair's curly. And so I do have a lot of kind of inner voices that I navigate when I'm pitching, or when I'm trying to invite somebody into the company, or even when I'm doing my wrap-ups at the end of the month. I worry about my team's confidence in me a lot. And we meditate through it. We've got little mantras, and we navigate it. But of course, I think that's really common, that people are going to have these insecurities that they bring with them into the business. And sometimes I actually see my own insecurities kind of proliferate among employees. And I have to, as soon as I see it reflected back at me, I have to laugh at how silly it seems sometimes on my employees when they get anxious about their performance. And I think they're the best employee in the world. And I hear the anxiety in their voice as they're presenting something. And it really gives me, it's kind of like theater. You get the mirror held up to you. So yeah, I don't know if there's like a nice button on that, but but that's the answer. Is I've got tons of insecurities in leading a business.
I've got one. Usually our insecurities are our greatest strengths.
Absolutely. That is a perfect button.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for giving me that button.
Brian Mohr, CEO of Anthem. Fran is here from home, all the way from New York, coming to Phoenix soon. We're happy to have you. Let us know how we can support that effort. And thank you so much. We're going to wrap up in the next session for day 2 of Phoenix Startup Week. Thank you so much for your time. Be well.